As you've heard on Bridge City News, there have been a number of pro-Palestinian rallies around the world. Protesters demanding that the war in Gaza comes to an end between Israel and Hamas. But now here's a first. Some protesters are actually flying swastikas at the rallies, including one which took place recently in London, England. Now, to chat about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert and the host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari, joining us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, I never thought I would see the day that someone would refer to Israel and the Jews as Nazis, but here we are. And apparently some of the police in London say the display of a swastika is not necessarily anti-Semitic or a disruption of public order?
It's horrific. This one woman, and we'll talk about this one example and then move out broader. This one woman was just observing all of this, and she goes over to the police and says, "Oh my gosh, there's swastikas here," and they told her to take it into context, put it all into context. Meaning, around October 7th, he's basically saying it's okay to have a swastika. Now, obviously, any sane person would say, "Hey, what does a swastika have to do with being pro-Palestinian? How does it help the Palestinian cause to put up swastikas?" The only thing it's telling us is that these protests are not about being pro-Palestinian. It's about being anti-Jewish. It's about being anti-Semitic. It's about being against Jews all over the world, not just about land in Israel, not about policies in Israel, not about October 7th. And this is horrific, to have police actually not protect Jews or those who are there to support the land of Israel or to support the Jewish people. It is getting very, very scary. This is not the only example. I saw a lot of examples over Easter weekend when they were disruptive. They were, trying to intimidate, cause fear, all across the board. So again, I ask the question: if you are in fact in favor of a better future for the Palestinian people, how does any of this violent and very bigoted behavior help the cause of the Palestinian people? It's really horrific.
Let's talk about one of those interruptions here for just a moment, Lisa. Pro-Palestinian protesters interrupted an Easter Vigil Mass that took place at St Patricks Cathedral in New York over the weekend. Let's talk more about that.
Right. Yeah, if you were able to watch the footage of any of this, we had this up at the Foreign Desk, the videos. It's just scary to watch how there is no respect for whether it's the dropping of the ball at Times Square, or even in this case, even more horrific, St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is the eminent, Easter service in the United States. That church is so symbolic in the middle of New York City. And to see that there is no respect for this holy day. I spoke at a Christian university this last week, and it was amazing to see so many of the Christian students see all of this attack, the anti-Semitism all around the world happening all over. They saw it as an attack on Christians as well. And I think that point is very much lost. This is not just about land in Israel. This is a jihad against the West. And so much of that is lost. I mean, again, we're talking about the extremists. There are very well-intentioned people who are fighting for the Palestinian people and a better future for the Palestinian people. And I hope that those people are able to call out the radicalism, call out Hamas, and want a future for the Palestinian people away from radicalism, away from terrorism, and away from Hamas. But in this case, we have to call a spade a spade. Disrupting a service at St. Patrick's Cathedral does nothing for the Palestinian cause. It actually takes away from the Palestinian cause, and it ruins the name of a movement that would actually help the future of the Palestinian people and actually help there be peace and coexistence in the Middle East. So, I mean, I don't know how this will end, how this will be reined in, but we're seeing it everywhere. On the streets in Canada, on the streets of New York City, on the streets of London and Los Angeles, on campuses, in Congress, all throughout the world. So I really do hope that those who really want a better future for the Middle East, for the Palestinian people, for the Jews living side by side, will call out this behavior.
You know, it appears as though U.S. President Joe Biden has changed his tune somewhat on Gaza, shifting his strategy on the Israel-Hamas war amid a looming threat from activist groups and his voters ahead of the November federal election.
Right. So there's a movement throughout the left to boycott or to step away from supporting Biden, and many of those people are in swing states. So this is purely about votes. It's not about where the United States stands on policy. It's not traditionally our policy. It's not in our strategic interest to step away from supporting Israel fully. Again, I think many people don't understand the relationship between Israel and the United States. It's not a Democrat or Republican position. It's a position of strategy and security. It's a position of having Israel as our only democratic ally in the region. And working together with Israel. We give that aid money to Israel because there is a partnership there. The United States benefits from that relationship. So the bullying, the intimidation to stop with the Israel support, it's very damaging, and it will far outlast the Biden administration. And that is why we said the same thing under the Obama administration, that supporting Israel is part of our foreign policy. It's not a left, right, or center issue. And throwing Israel under the bus the way that President Obama did had long-lasting ramifications. We saw President Trump obviously have a close relationship with Israel. The Abraham Accords came about. Again, when these two are aligned, we have a better chance at bringing that stability and security to the Middle East, better chance for the Palestinian people as well. So, what's happening right now is very short-sighted. Of course, leading up to the election, I think the Biden administration is very scared. They want to capture those votes. But what they don't understand is when people that are boycotting the Biden campaign say from the river to the sea, these small concessions regarding Israel policy, not going to help. They want Israel off the map, and that is not something that the United States is going to do or support. No one should support that. So it's an election year, so we have a lot of crazy news.
Yeah, we'll see how it all plays out here. Lisa, the Washington Free Beacon is reporting that the Biden administration remains committed to supporting the main Palestinian assistance organization at the UN, UNRWA. Now, this despite the fact that there are concerns that the group may be helping to fund the terrorist group Hamas.
Right, and we know that there were several UNRWA employees who actually participated in the October 7th attacks. Now, according to Israel's account, there are more than 400 UNRWA employees who are part of Hamas or members of Hamas. And we know that 12 or 13 of them approximately participated in the attacks themselves. That is why the United States decided to withdraw its support for UNRWA. Some other states followed suit. Then again, some countries started giving them support again. But the United States has remained committed to not supporting UNRWA because of the fact that they're involved with Hamas. Now, those are the headlines, right? How behind the scenes, it seems as though, according to this report by the Free Beacon, that the United States is still working behind the scenes with UNRWA, which goes to show, I mean, who can we trust here? Did they just say that they're withdrawing aid because of the headline, because they wanted to do what is right on the surface, but then behind the scenes continue to work with a UN organization that is being funded by US taxpayer money, that is involved with an actual terror organization that is on the United States FTO, which is the Foreign Terrorist Organization list? Make it make sense.
French government officials announced over the weekend that their government would introduce a United Nations resolution calling for an end to the war in Gaza and, Lisa, the establishment of a Palestinian state. Now, the draft also apparently includes condemnation for the October 7th attacks and for Hamas to release the remaining Israeli hostages.
You know, they can draft up as many resolutions as they'd like. I don't know who's going to go along with this, but certainly we know Hamas will not go along with it. It's funny on its face, because I will tell you how so many people across the world, whether in formal positions or informal protesters on the streets, are calling for a ceasefire. But people don't realize how many ceasefire proposals were all rejected by Hamas. The latest one was actually the most lopsided deal in favor of Hamas. They would get about 700 or 800 prisoners out of Israeli jails in exchange for only 40 of those hostages, and they said no. That was a ceasefire offer, and they said no. So now we're going back to the UN for France, of all people, to come out and say, well, we want there to be two states, because now we want to reward Hamas at the helm of the Palestinian people. We want to reward them with a state because they committed October 7th massacre. It makes no sense. Neither side is prepared to acknowledge two states. And the ceasefire, well, they're not ready to give back those hostages. We're coming up on 6 months of this nonsense, and they're not going to give up those hostages. There are men that I know, the family of one of those hostages is over 85 years old, and they are very worried. He has not gotten the proper medical care he needs, not gotten the medication he needs. And here we are.
You know, Lisa, I'm wondering how many of those hostages are even still alive. Maybe that's
Right,
why they couldn't give 40 hostages, you know, because maybe they're not even
right,
around anymore. I pray
right.
that's not the case. An Egyptian man was arrested in connection with a foiled Islamic State terrorist attack on the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, Lisa. The man in his early 60s was indicted on the charge of criminal terrorist association and put in pretrial detention last month.
Right. So again, another example of the fixation on a, an iconic establishment representing Christianity, representing art, representing history. No regard. This is an attack by allegedly ISIS. We saw an attack by ISIS in Russia, and now one here. And just this morning, United States terror expert gave his testimony on why he believes there will be an ISIS attack in the near future in the United States. And let's pray that he is wrong. They're everywhere. Again, when we are focused on different things, right? So first it was Russia, Ukraine. Then our focus is on Israel and the Palestinians. ISIS gets to beef up its own assets and continue to do its one-off attacks in different places in the world. And look where they're fixated, Hal, on churches, on concert halls, places where people are, again, representation of the West, representation of culture, of history, of religion, of Christianity, of Judaism, of all the things that are the underlining foundation of our Judeo-Christian, culture here in the West. Again, it's time for the West to wake up. Canada, the United States, Europe, the United Nations. We need to have better policies in place to truly curb the growth of these terror entities.
Are we hearing from more Islamic groups condemning a lot of the attacks by these other terrorist groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, Boko Haram, who have a lot of connections to Islam? Are we hearing from more of the Muslim groups saying, you know, enough's enough, that's not what true Islam is all about, it's about peace?
You know, Hal, you're a journalist and you're a classically trained journalist, and you know what it's all about. If it bleeds, it leads. So, what we do here are the voices of those imams that are calling for more October 7th type attacks, more attacks against the Jews. There were a few imams over the weekend that said, Easter is a great time to attack, Jews and Christians. But there are groups that are calling for coexistence. There are groups that are calling out October 7th, but we don't hear from them. There are individuals, there are actual Palestinian individuals. Of course, their lives are being threatened. Of course, they have to have 24-hour security, but they are calling out what is happening, all the violence and October 7th. But unfortunately, we don't hear enough of them, and they're not leading the conversation. But they should be. We should hear their voices, and we should lean on those people to take us forward. Even those, if you recall, months before, or weeks before, I should say, October 7th attack, there were Palestinians inside Gaza that were protesting Hamas. But of course, their lives were on the line. Of course, they kill protesters. They have no regard for life. There's no freedom of speech. There's no freedom of writing. There's no right to your own political opinion or opposition or dissent. But we don't hear enough from those individuals. Of course, they are either silenced or, again, it doesn't get the headline because it's out of the ordinary. It's nothing out of the ordinary. We are hearing from a lot of these more violent voices, very unfortunately, whether it's on social media, where it has a very far and dangerous reach, or from their different platforms.
U.S. President Joe Biden declared Easter Sunday, Lisa, as Transgender Day of Visibility. Now, Biden is calling on all Americans to join in lifting up the lives and voices of transgender people throughout the nation to eliminate violence and discrimination based on gender identity. But let me ask you something. Why Easter Sunday and not today, Monday, or even on a Tuesday?
Right. So there was huge backlash on this, right? Those who observe Easter, those who even don't observe Easter, but thought it was a crazy juxtaposition to have it be on that day. There are others who are saying, well, it's going to be March 31st every year. So this year it fell on Easter Sunday, but next year it won't. Because obviously Easter is going to be on the Sunday after daylight, at the end of the month. It's always a different date. Regardless, it was a bad look. Regardless, it was the wrong time to connect these two things. Let Easter be Easter. Even a friend and myself were having this discussion yesterday where, why are there so many shops that are open on Easter Sunday? And when I was growing up, on the East Coast, nothing was open on Easter Sunday. Nothing was open on Thanksgiving. Nothing was open on Christmas. And that's the way it should be, because we're in a country that those are the national holidays. There has to be some difference, but now we're seeing that that's not the case. It doesn't feel like Easter. It doesn't feel like and when you have the leader, our president, not giving that space to have Easter be its national holiday, of course, there was a lot of backlash, I think, from a lot of different people who may have respect for the trans community, but didn't feel like this was the proper way to have it be on the same day.
Perhaps this is the reason why a lot of people look at our country as becoming more of a secularist society instead of leading more towards the traditional religious holidays like you mentioned, right? Foreign affairs expert and host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari, thanks so much for joining us once again from the City of Angels.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Hal.